All right, today we're going to talk about the cosine function. So how can we graph the most basic, the parent function of cosine? So again, using our unit circle, we have our four xy values from 0 to 360 or 0 to 2 pi. And if we start with cosine is 0, notice how the x value, which is the cosine, of 0 degrees or 0 radians is 1. So actually where sine started at your midline, or your origin, cosine will start at your maximum. And so if you can remember that, cosine starts at your maximum and sine starts at your midline. That would be very helpful. As we go around, only looking at the x values, at pi over 2 now, we have an x value of 0. And then at 1 pi, we have an x value of -1. Back down to 3 pi over 2, we come back up to our midline. And then finally, making one full time around the unit circle, at 2 pi, we have an x value of 0. So if I were to connect this, we still look very similar to the sine function. So that's what is kind of interesting about sine and cosine. Now let's take a look at the negative values. So again, if I started at 0 and I went negative 90 degrees, or negative pi over 2, I would have an x value, cosine value of 0. -1 pi, x value of -1, and then we would continue this pattern. Hopefully you've noticed a pattern by now. Minimum, midline, and then maximum. And it would continue the pattern. So we have maximum, midline, minimum, midline, maximum, midline, minimum, midline, maximum, and you keep going in that sort of pattern. So how would this graph look? Now when you graph this, and you lay this side by side with your sine function, they are going to look very similar. And what you'll notice is that if I could take my sine function, or in this case, if I could take my cosine function, and I could take cosine and lift it off the board and move it just to the right, one tick mark. Notice how this dot would be right here at the origin, which is where your sine function starts. So your cosine function is just shifted to the right one tick mark, and that would give you your sine function. Or we could say our sine function, if we lifted it off and shifted it left one tick mark, would be the cosine function. So they're very, very similar to each other. So memorizing that cosine starts at the maximum and sine starts at the midline, or the origin, will really help you. And after a while, you start to get used to the pattern and how this can be drawn quickly.